minutes of questions and answers, and I am looking forward to hearing brief questions or comments. There are two people that will have microphones, and in a moment we'll come over to you. But I do want to say that, as I said before, I'm a rabbi, and I therefore, ipso facto, know how hard it is to keep my remarks brief. I've heard of the expression, be the change you want to see in the world. I'm asking us, all of us, to metaphorically be the rabbi we like to hear in synagogue by being short, well, sweet, and whether it's a comment or a question, please, in the interest of letting other people speak, bring it to a point rapidly.
Good afternoon. I'd like to address the question to Rabbi Tucker. What do you think about perhaps another category of Jews as far as those who are from either matrilineal or patrilineal descent, but there is the non-Jewish partner agrees to raise the child Jewish without converting themselves? What about those situations?
We'll take a couple of questions. If there's someone else who wants to go for now, then we'll answer several in a row.
This is to Emma's. I'm Cameron Simon. I'm curious about your relationship with your father. Does your father consider you to be Jewish? I very often feel that when I'm baked in on a conversion, that we're not only accepting that person into our tradition, but that person's giving up a great deal of what they have in their heritage as they were growing up. I know the case of a mother whose child converted to Judaism, but still expects that child to come home for Christmas and to be there with the family around the tree. So my question to you is, what is your relationship with your father?
I guess Rabbi Tucker, when a child was adopted and brought up Jewishly by two Jewish parents, why does that child have to go through a baptism or through a conversion?
All right, so one more question, sure.
This is maybe a question that'll come up, not today, and over the course of 3 days. In today's issues with infertility, where a child might be born to a surrogate parent or with donor insemination, I won't go into all the different choices, then where do we go?
Okay, thank you.
Great, so I actually think those two questions joined together. I'll start here and then come back to here. The fact that there is, certainly within the halakhic tradition, but I think you can say across denominations as well, a consensus that an adopted child needs to go through conversion is itself one of the great proofs and basic pieces of evidence that, again, as I began with, dissent matters. We are uncomfortable for the most part in our contemporary conversation acknowledging this, but it is not blood matters. Dissent matters when talking about what it means to be a Jew. Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Jacob and Rachel and Rebecca and Leah, all of these people are not just ideas in the Jewish tradition, they are ancestors. And even though once the picture is complicated, such that it is possible to enter through conversion, we no longer say that dissent is completely dispositive of whether you are a Jew. It does mean that on some level, acquiring a Jewish body, either by birth or via immersion, is the way that this has always been thought about. Now, the question of how one calibrates that, and in what cases are what kinds of steps necessary, that goes to the complicated question of what role should a decision to raise someone Jewish make. Here I think we often think about this from the perspective of how that is a mitigating factor. If someone agrees to raise someone Jewish, that can sort of overcome, maybe it can overcome the issues of dissent. What you find actually interestingly in the tradition are some voices that agree with the basic notion that raising someone as a Jew is important, but usually view it when they raise it from the aggravating factor perspective. That is to say, you have a number of sources that argue that the child of a Jewish mother and a Gentile father is Jewish when the child was raised as a Jew. But if the child was not raised as a Jew, there's no reason to treat that child any different than the child of a Jewish father and a Gentile mother. So I think engaging with that notion of context and background and upbringing is actually critical. It's not so obvious to me that it only cuts in the direction of that making someone more Jewish when it's present, as opposed to also thinking about the ways in which it may make someone less Jewish, again, on the level of status as opposed to identity. I think Rebecca's point here is well taken. I think that is very critical. One other piece I just want to throw out when we think about I sort of mostly agree with what Rebecca said about there being great difficulty in having a pluralistic solution to questions like this. But I will say that I think even within the halachic tradition, there are a number of pathways that have not been fully explored. One of them, which is most significant, is the notion of doing certain ritual actions al t'nai, on condition, that certain conditions hold. And I'm not so sure that we wouldn't actually make a huge degree of headway in splitting, maybe cutting this Gordian knot of status versus identity by being willing to say things like, you may be Jewish in terms of your Jewish identity. It's not something I can redefine for you of telling you how you understand yourself. I might still be able to say that in terms of this, your status vis-a-vis the group of people you're now trying to fully integrate with, there may be a barrier that requires immersion in order for you to be in that community as an equal. But there's nothing that makes it impossible. We actually find some sources that talk about this. The idea that someone could go into the mikvah and essentially say, if I'm Jewish, this act is merely an act of immersion for either for the halibut or for in advance of Yom Kippur or any other number of things. If I'm not Jewish, which may not be the fact pattern as I see it, may this count towards some kind of change in my status for those who see it differently. That doesn't mean it's uncomplicated, but the whole thing is once you have these relationships of people disagreeing about status, it's not uncomplicated.
First, I'll say I feel a slight need to respond to that, which I will just do. One of the challenges I see here is that as very literate and educated people, we have a lot of power. And I find that of all the people I've talked to who are patrilineal Jews and who underwent something like a conversion or an affirmation ceremony, only one of them had thoroughly positive feelings about it. And she actually had 2 conversions, which just shows you the kind of person she is. Conservative and then Orthodox. And everybody else had significant regrets or feelings of inadequacy or that they weren't counseled properly or those kinds of things. And I think it just, at some level, I'm somebody who loves ritual and I'm like, yes, let's do it. Let's all go, immerse for fun, before Yom Kippur, whatever, and all tonight, whatever. And on the other hand, for most people who are not literate Jews and who are not deeply engaged in this conversation, that isn't going to feel like, oh, the door is wide open and this is just a technicality. I think it's a real challenge, and I share the feeling and struggle with it. As to the relationship with my father, I have a great relationship with my father. We have the normal parent-child stuff where he wishes I would get a better job and make more money and all that kind of stuff. He's very Jewish mother-y in certain ways. He stuffs me with food and all of that. I think that your question goes to something that is about, is it confusing to be both when you're young? I did not find it in any way confusing. It was very clear to me, and it seemed like adults were the people who were confused about this. I had 2 heritages. I was 2 kinds of person, 2 tastes, better than one. It wasn't like at any point I could not understand who I was or where I was in the world. And frankly, for me, the moment of becoming a Jew was realizing that I did believe in Jesus. I mean, it really was that simple. I went to church more often than synagogue as a child and found it spiritual and beautiful and all those things, and I couldn't accept a basic tenet of Christian faith. So I think it is less confusing than people think, and that's a much longer conversation, but I actually don't agree with the idea of you give up everything else. I spend Christmas with my Catholic father and his Protestant wife frequently, and I go to church to midnight mass, and I feel like there's a whole other conversation about what is it like to be a Jew who goes to mass and so on. But that's a question of I I'm a firm Jew. I can figure out what my relationship is to other religions as an adult. And as a child, I think it is a lot less confusing for people.
Does your father consider you Jewish?
Yes, it is.